Well, we are going to practice our next apprenticeship activity today. But before we get into it, I wanted to recap a bit of what we've already looked at in regards to apprenticeship as a whole and how it fits into this bigger thing called Disciple Equip and equipping in general. Does anybody remember what our equipping model is as a church? Anybody? Obviously, I can't hear you, but anybody remember it? You guys might remember a couple of weeks ago, I shared with you to look earlier on in your workbook where we talk about our equipping model being teaching, apprenticeship, and immersion. Teaching is Bible teaching that shapes our hearts and desires. Apprenticeship is where we set that into practice, and then immersion is where we put that practice into our everyday lives and our habits that we form. And each of these apprenticeship activities that we've been practicing are they're basically spiritual disciplines. And as we practice a spiritual discipline, which is what we do, we are spiritually formed. Spiritual formation is how we're formed as we do something. And so this week we're looking at, and I'll give you a little bit of an overview here, the spiritual formation being God is love, so we receive God's love and give God's love to others. We heard that in the message on Sunday. And we want to form a desire for God's love, to know Him and to be in relationship with Him, but also a desire to love others around us. And when we think about that in terms of disciplines, we're going to be practicing the spiritual discipline of sacrificial service. But there are a lot of different spiritual disciplines that cultivate our love for God and for others. And I'll just give you an example of a few. First, prayer. We looked last week at the Acts prayer model, and prayer is a huge part of cultivating our love for God, especially as we communicate with Him and we spend time in His presence and time relating to Him. Also, Bible study. We enjoy spending time with God through His Word, and perhaps you've been practicing that through our daily devotionals, the Listen, Learn, Live inductive Bible study devotionals that we've given to you in your workbook. But in any way that we're spending time in God's Word, that's cultivating our love for God. Also, when we worship together on Sundays, that's a discipline of cultivating our love for God as we meet with Him together with His people every Sunday. But even if you enjoy spending time in God's creation, that's a great way to cultivate love for God and to enjoy His love for us as He's created such a beautiful world for us. So those are just some examples, but for our group time, we're specifically going to focus on one way that we cultivate and practice loving others, and that is through sacrificial service. Now, sacrificial service is something that we can do in two different ways, and both of these are important: planned and spontaneous. And the only way to cultivate a desire to practice spontaneous service is by regularly practicing planned service. That's why we have hospitality teams on Sundays, and we practice serving one another in the context of our church gatherings and our worship gatherings. But then we also provide you with opportunities and channels to go out and to serve the community together, which we're going to look at in a moment. And so both of these things are ways of planning to sacrificially serve others. And the goal of that is also, it's not just the service itself, but it's also to lead us to a desire to practice spontaneous opportunities to sacrificially serve others. And so how are we going to practice this in our groups? Well, we're not actually going to do the serving in this moment, unless, of course, you happen to have time in your group gathering. But we're going to plan to serve. That's how we're going to do it. We're going to plan to serve others in your group or plan to serve others with your group. So looking at serving one another in your group, what we'll do is we'll spend a few minutes and write down a single need that you have that someone else in your group can meet this month. Maybe it's not tomorrow, maybe it's sometime later in the month. Share that need with your group after you've written it down, and as other people are sharing, kind of listen, pray, and respond by volunteering to serve one person in your group. Who are you going to serve? Who is someone else in your group that you can serve. And then the other option, and I would encourage you guys to do both of these, is to serve others with your group. Is there a need in the community that your group can meet? Maybe it's something that your whole group can do to serve someone in one of your neighborhoods, or maybe it's in the greater region on the west side. Or is there a way that you can get involved in serving Trinity or serving the community with Trinity? In your workbook, you should have a page that looks a little bit something like this. And we've listed off a bunch of ways in which you can participate in serving Trinity, but also ways that you can serve the community with Trinity, because we want to care for those who are outside of the church as well. And so look through that, talk through that, pray through that with your group. Perhaps there's one of these opportunities that you all would like to step into. And that's the activity, that's it. So enjoy as you get to talk through and pray through this activity.